Good morning. Welcome to today's meeting of the Assembly Committee on Ways and Means, Senate Committee on Finance, Joint Subcommittees on Public Safety, Natural Resources, and Transportation. I am pleased to be chairing today's meeting, and with that, we'll get started. With the Secretary, please call the roll.
Senators Nguyen.
Here.
Titus.
Here.
Taylor.
Present.
Assembly members Anderson.
Present.
Brown May.
Here.
Dickman.
Here.
Hibbets. Mosca.
Here.
Chair Watts.
And I am here. We do have all members present. Thank you for anyone joining us today in Carson City or Las Vegas or on virtually. We're glad to have you here. A few housekeeping items real quick. Please be sure to silence your electronic devices. Please turn the microphone on before you speak, off after you finish. Please remember to always state your name for the record, spell your last name so that we make sure we get our minutes accurate. If you are planning to speak and you have a business card, please provide one to our committee staff. We will be hearing 4 budgets from the Department of Wildlife today. We will take public comment at the end of today's meeting. If you'd like to provide public comment by phone, please call 888-475-4499. And when prompted, provide the meeting ID 822-22-06-1131 and then press pound. With that, we will get right into our presentation. So I'd like to welcome the Department of Wildlife, Director Janae, and your team to the table. Whenever you are ready, you can get started. Welcome.
Thank you and good morning. For the record, Alan Janae, Jenne, Director of Nevada Department of Wildlife, and appreciate the opportunity to come present our budgets. And also just want to wish you all a happy first day of spring. Yeah, it's good news. So, yeah, leave the snow behind us, we're moving forward. So, also wanted to introduce our Deputy Director of Admin Services, Jordan Goshert, and we'll just kind of walk through this and see where we get. So, the department's mission, Department of Wildlife's mission is the same as it's always been. Just in summary, it's to protect, conserve, manage, and restore wildlife and its habitats for all its values and benefits to the citizens of Nevada and the United States, as well as promoting safety of vessels on Nevada's waters. When we think about Department of Wildlife, we like to convey, everybody thinks of us as hunting, fishing, kind of just put us in that little bubble. And we play a critical role in protecting Nevada's environment. Much of the work that we do is about restoring and managing those habitats for wildlife, but also for the benefit of all Nevadans. The way we look at it is healthy ecosystems are good for any living thing, and humans are part of the ecological system of Nevada. And so we see that as a broader benefit to the citizens of Nevada. Additionally, we're looking at protecting wildlife and habitats to ensure that there's clean air, clean water, and it's there for the public to enjoy. The wildlife conservation that we support, as I mentioned, has hunting, fishing, but we also have boating that we enforce. And in general, what you see is also bird watchers, but other secondary uses such as hiking, camping, that also gain the benefits out of wildlife and wildlife habitat management. Additionally, there's much research that shows the benefits of citizens and individuals being outdoors and enjoying their time outdoor. It's good for your mental and physical health. I know, especially myself, it takes me no time at all to be out in the woods, and I can forget a lot of my problems. But additionally, just want to call out the significance of what our constituents, both from hunting, fishing, and boating, contribute to Nevada's economy. Numbers that we have, most recent numbers, have that combined economic benefit to Nevada at over $1.4 billion annually. So they do contribute. Everybody, it's amazing how you can find money to do the fun things. And so, yeah, I would say that's a really clear case with our constituents. When you look at the department structure, we have the director's office, oversees the operations of all of the divisions. We have 7 distinct divisions: data and technologies, conservation education, law enforcement, game management, fisheries management, biodiversity division, and the habitat division. That makes up 279 employees. We also have a 9-member Board of Wildlife Commissions. As far as facilities, we have approximately 120 buildings, 14 wildlife management areas, 4 fish hatcheries, and these are all spread across the 3 regions you can see signified in the colors. When you look at our department's budget, and what we're proposing here is we're proposing a total budget for 2026 to set just over $77 million. And in 2027, looking at $78.7 million. Again, that 279 FTEs. When you think about our budget, we are 98% self-derived funding, only 2% from the general fund. You can see here what we're asking for, or built into this budget request is 1.58 in the first year, 1.58 million in the first year, and 1.57 in the second year, out of a total, like I said, of 78 million in that second year. So we don't rely on much of the general fund. Much of our funding comes from tag and license fees, as well as dedicated federal excise tax off of guns, ammunition, fishing equipment, motorboat fuel tax, and Coast Guard funding. And so diving into the meat of our budget requests, as I was saying earlier, the director's office, budget account 4460, we have 33 employees. Also incorporated within the director's office is management and support of the Board of Wildlife Commissioners, as well as the county advisory boards that are also part of that public input process. We have our physical services division, human resources, and engineering and facilities. And in FY26, we have a proposed budget of $11.73778 million, and in 27, $11,760,355. When we look at the decision units, I'm not going to walk through every one of these. I'm going to kind of call out some significant ones. Is you look at E365, our fleet vehicles. One of the things we're looking at doing in year one, we've got $78,510, and in the second year, $94,560 dedicated to this, stepping into the use of fleet services. We have gone through a very rigorous process this last year to try to evaluate our fleet, and based on conversations with other agencies within the state, as we've seen the benefits that they're deriving from using fleet services. In the past, we've bought our vehicles, often end up with very high mileage, and you can imagine in the environment that we work outdoors, traveling through the field, those vehicles receive very tough miles, but yet for the agency to get the benefit out of them, we often keep them for very high mileage. So we're seeing the benefit, at least on our evaluation of it, is that this opportunity to work with fleet services and have a higher turnover, better maintenance on those vehicles, we expect that that'll be a significant impact to the agency. Additionally, when we look at this, is that the units that we've selected to put into fleet services are those that are more where fleet services are oriented. So we've got our employees spread across the entire state, many of them in rural locations, and those were not what we have selected to put to fleet services. We were more about those that are in and around these urban areas like Reno, Carson, Vegas, and even Elko. As far as another item on here, decision unit, we do have the ask for a new construction project coordinator 2, and also the reclassification of a maintenance repair worker 2 to a construction project coordinator 2. And this is, the rationale behind that is to try to set up a construction project coordinator 2 in each of our regions. As I mentioned, we have 120 major facilities. We have a backlog of maintenance, as is the case, I think, with many state agencies, is you have a lot of older buildings, and they need a lot of work. And so we've got a very long list of items, and in our assessment, using a construction project coordinator 2, is that they can manage contracts and contractors in facilitating getting that maintenance work done. And so that's a proposal that we have. Moving on to Data and Technology Services Division, they have 32 employees spread across licensing, the HUNT application and draw system, customer support, geographic information systems, voting registration, and information technology. In FY26, we're proposing $8,017,024. In FY27, we're proposing $8,183,206. Major decision units want to discuss within this is you can look at E227. This is the establish of a unified data system for the department's data management. As I've presented in past discussions, as scientists, we're great about collecting data, and at times very possessive about holding it, and often it can be in places where it isn't put to the best use by either the department or by the public. And so we're trying to pull all of that information into a centralized database for each of the divisions so that it is more available, but also is stored in a better system for the long-term use. And so we're looking at that our estimate in both FY26 and FY27, based off of what we have received from other states as far as their input on how they put together their data, centralized data system, is $1,262,428 each year. Looking at E226 decision unit, we're also looking to set up a program for our SLAPs. Those are special license and permits. And we're trying to set this up because just to improve the customer interface. The way the process currently works, it's a very paper-centric, old-fashioned manner in which we provide those SLAPs to those individuals, and so this would create a better user interface and expedited process for our customers through the SLAPs. Moving on to the law enforcement division, our law enforcement division has 54 employees within it. It takes care of wildlife enforcement, public safety, boating enforcement, boating education currently. We'll get to that. Dispatch services and radio technology. Proposed budget for FY26 is $10,054,253, and in FY27, $10,064,250. Our boating enforcement and education is one of the things that people don't often associate with our game wardens. Our game wardens are one of the smallest forces in the United States. Our distribution of these employees across the landscape leads to, a very small workforce of individuals that are out there enforcing laws across Nevada's 110,000 square miles. In 2024, our game wardens contacted 1,888 vessels and assisted 81. Additionally, I've spoke to, and you've probably seen in the news, is that often involves, they're often the highway patrol of the waters. And so when accident happens, frequently they are first responders on those. And we've had water rescues where individuals, some of our game wardens have actually been recognized at a national level by the Coast Guard for their efforts in saving Nevada's boaters. Additionally, in 2024, NDOW saw a 20% increase in our boating education certificates, and boating education numbers have been up or are up 187% since 2018. And last year was the first time that our boating education program began offering paddle sport classes on the water, including kayak and fishing classes, or kayak fishing classes, and so those are really cool. Moving on. So looking at the law enforcement division, I've got a slide for E275, so I'll save that. But looking at E900, we are looking at taking the boating safety enforcement education program out of the law enforcement division and taking that $461,272 over in FY26, and then nearly the same, a little bit less in FY27, taking that over to our conservation education division. This is where it originated prior to a couple sessions ago when we moved it over to law enforcement, thoughting there was some gains to be there, but our conservation educators, they are often the communicators, the PIOs of the agency. We have seen the efficiencies in trying to pull that back together and all having them all work together, and having boating being a piece of the conservation education division. So we're looking to facilitate that. That'll take those two positions and the operating costs and the travel back to conservation education. So as I said, E275 decision unit, we're looking at public safety. We're asking for general fund commitment of $500,000 in each year. This is to assist our law enforcement division with the ability to deal with public safety. As we've talked in many of our hearings, is that public safety, our funding model is not set up to support general public safety items. It's very much specific funding to fund wildlife and conservation. And if we take funds to try to support public safety, it can create diversion issues from the federal government, as hunting and fishing licenses are very restricted in what their uses are for conservation and wildlife. And so we're asking for this to try to support that public safety ask, because as I've discussed in the past, we do get called into. We're not going to say no when there's a shooting at the Las Vegas campus. We're going to be there if we're in proximity. As I've mentioned, our rural game wardens are part of a very small law enforcement fleet that exists in those small rural towns, and so there have been situations where we've had shooters or local enforcement that needed backup, and our game wardens are there. And as I've said, we're not going to say no, but it does put our funding at jeopardy in these situations, and so further support with general fund would help in that. Additionally, we're looking at additional support for our vessel, our boating enforcement. As I've said, boating on Nevada's waters is probably the greatest overlap we have with just the general citizen. As most people think of us as hunting, fishing, but boating, we get everybody. And especially down on Meade and Mojave in the summer, we get all kinds of local citizens, but also all of the tourists that show up in town and may rent vessels and be out there enjoying them, and sometimes have zero background or education on how to operate those vessels safely. So that's what we're looking for with this decision unit. Moving on to Habitat Division. The Habitat Division has 41 employees spread across project review, development project review, the industrial development program, habitat restoration and rehabilitation, our private lands program, water development, and wildlife management areas. And so in FY26, we're looking at $16,260,530, and 27, nearly the same, little bit more, $16,331,118. Key decision units within this are the transfer of E901, the transfer of technical guidance from the Habitat Division over to our Biodiversity Division. This is a scenario by which we can increase the capacity of the technical guidance program. Currently, even within the Habitat Division, there's a very small subset of people that work on this and then coordinate with other divisions. By moving it over to the Biodiversity Division, we'll have some additional capacity, plus better aligned with the expertise. There's roughly 897 species in the state of Nevada, and the Biodiversity Division oversees about 2/3 of those, 700 of them. And so they have that expertise to help input into that process in a more informed way. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, when we consider the work that we do as the Department of Wildlife in trying to conserve our species and their habitats, the benefits we see, especially in this habitat and restoration rehabilitation, overlaps to the benefits of all citizens. You consider the work that we do in trying to restore and rehabilitate the wildlands of Nevada. You've probably heard me mention multiple times, we've lost 50% of our state's sagebrush since 1986, either lost or converted. In many instances, that is replaced. If you do nothing, that's going to be replaced with annual invasive cheatgrass, which is like gasoline on the landscape. And so we work with other federal agencies to try to restore those habitats and bring back those perennial grasses and shrubs. And so that reduces that fire risk and takes away some of that threat of cheatgrass. And since 2017, we've done over 700,000 acres of that work. And so while we're not keeping pace with our wildfires, we're putting in a heck of an effort. Additionally, the work that we do in habitat restoration improves water infiltration, air purification, and carbon sequestration. You can only imagine the amount of carbon that a little itty bitty cheatgrass plant can store versus a sagebrush, and there's lots of science on it, but they absolutely are those carbon source or carbon accumulators in Nevada's landscape. And so other things we're not very well known for is the work that we do to protect Nevada's scarcest resource, which are the waters of Nevada. There's a picture here. It depicts a spring that we protected, fenced out to try to manage the use on it. And we work with private landowners and livestock to basically implement these measures to protect them, but that keeps that point source water available to wildlife, and then as it flows out, it's there for livestock and others that are outside of the fence. But yeah, we consider these the benefits that are available to the greater public, and as I mentioned, all of those other uses. Not many people want to go mountain biking, hiking, camping in the middle of a cheatgrass flat. Most people, you're going to see them being attracted towards those deeper sage, aspen pockets, those healthy habitats. And so I think that's about as clear-cut case as like just contemplate where you want to go camping or where you'd like to spend your time. And that's very much where wildlife would like to spend their time. Not many species exist within those converted habitats, and so that's one of the missions that we try to do within our wildlife division or wildlife habitat restoration efforts. And so with that, that's wraps up my presentation, and I stand for any questions.
All right. Thank you very much, Director Janae, for the presentation. We do have some questions. I will start. I have a few. So we'll start with the first budget you presented, 4460, the Director's Office. I think the first thing I have some questions about is the construction project coordinator positions. So essentially, my understanding is we're creating those positions so that there's kind of regional representation. I think there is one position that currently exists, but is not currently filled. So I guess the first question I have is where you're looking at the reclassification of the maintenance repair worker into a construction project coordinator. Do you know how that would work for the incumbent person that is the maintenance repair worker? Would they have the qualifications essentially to move up and take over that position?
Thank you for the question, Chairman, and I will call up our Deputy Director of Operations, Caleb McAdoo. He is very informed and been very active in this effort very recently.
Thank you. Welcome, Mr. McAdoo.
Good morning, Chair. Caleb McAdoo for the record, MCADOO. I appreciate the question, and before I answer the question, I do want to just say the premise of this decision unit is really that the department's commitment to providing well-maintained facilities for not only our employees, but the public that come to them. And you know, we really want to be good stewards of those facilities, and with limited staff, we're having challenges to meet those needs. But to your question, that is something that we've absolutely analyzed, and yes, we believe that the individual that currently holds that position more than possesses the skills necessary to fulfill the construction project coordinator role.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I'm excited for that person because it'll be a well-deserved bump. The next question I think is aligned with some of the statements you just made. I think in some of the additional information that you've provided to us, we see that there's a backlog of projects. It's pretty significant, and I see here there's about 120 buildings and facilities to maintain. That's a pretty significant workload all across the state. So if you're able to get these positions and get them hired up, do you anticipate the backlog would be eliminated? Do you have a sense of the timeline? What can we see in terms of addressing some of the maintenance and project needs that have kind of stacked up?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Again, Caleb McAdoo for the record. You know, that's a tough question to answer. Frankly, the backlog seems to be a insurmountable amount of work, and you know, currently we have 4 staff and 1 vacant position. Adding this additional position is certainly going to help with some of the challenges we've faced with filling these vacancies. We've fallen even further behind. I don't think it would be a fair characterization to say that we would ever catch up to the backlog, but it's certainly going to allow us to meet those needs more quickly, more efficiently. And I think our business model here in going from a maintenance repair worker to a construction project coordinator platform across the regions really allows that expertise to align more along the lines of contracting the work out versus actually trying to complete the work in-house. Certainly there is some of that, and so we'll try and utilize some of those outside contractors to meet those needs as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I understand with the amount of work that needs to be done, some of the challenges in that. I appreciate the candor too, that this is we're not gonna get this backlog eliminated over the next biennium, even with these positions. I think if there's any work that you can do to just give us a sense of some of the progress that we could make with these positions as follow-up information, that would be helpful so that we can really understand, again, that we're not only are we going to hopefully stop going backwards, but hopefully we are going to make some progress forwards in addressing essentially deferred maintenance needs across these facilities. So not really a question, just a request of if you can help us get a little bit more of a sense of that.
Yeah, we can certainly follow up with that information.
Thank you. And then, so I think there's a position in the Western region, a construction project coordinator. It's been vacant for a little while. So I think if you could just discuss the impact that that's had. I think one of the things that was indicated to us is also some of the challenges because there is not that position in the other regions. There's significant travel involved for that position. So if you can also just speak to how you think this overall effort might assist in recruiting and what the prospects look like for getting that existing position filled, that would be very helpful.
Yes, thank you for the question, Caleb McAdoo, for the record. Great question. So when we realized we had this challenge, it really was brought to light with this vacancy, which occurred in April of 2023. We have had numerous announcements to fill that position, have made several offers, made an offer again yesterday for the position. And some of the most significant barriers of filling these positions, frankly, is salary. But it's also the applicants are seeing the amount of travel that's required to meet the needs of the department. Our state is huge. We all know that. And the regions and the facilities we have across the state, the travel that's required of them being away from their families has been one of the biggest barriers of people once they interview for the job and they find out about that, and the amount of overtime that it might take to make this happen has been a barrier. And so I think our plan and business model to locate a construction project coordinator in each of the three regions will hopefully control those things or mitigate those things within our control, such as travel, and minimize that travel, and hopefully make these positions more attractive to individuals, recognizing that the salary is a tough thing to address. And so we hope that helps that offset, or helps to offset those challenges. But we do recognize ultimately, as was discussed, we just made an offer yesterday, and the applicant again cited salary as the concern. I don't know if you have been able to review the Simmons Group class compensation study that's been recently put out, but this construction project coordinator series within that analysis show that even in the 10th percentile of a salary range for these positions, that would be $90,000, and we're not even meeting that. And so if we're striving for a 50th percentile of market conditions for these types of positions, we know we're going to fall short. And so we are trying to meet our needs at the same time making these positions more attractive and more competitive across the state.
Thank you for that, Mr. McAdoo. I appreciate, again, the candor there. I think that's certainly a concern for me if we're going to end up putting these positions out. And I know it's a much broader conversation about comp and class and reclassifications of positions across all the departments, but I think certainly, I'm certainly, appreciate the efforts, but I'm concerned that we potentially have these positions that we put out there that are so uncompetitive for the work required that we struggle to get those folks in. So let's continue that conversation, and if there are updates on either that position being filled or it not being filled, could you please let us know so that we can kind of understand some of the dynamics with that issue moving forward. Thank you. Okay. I think those were the questions that I had on that issue. So I think we'll now move on to Chair Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. And good morning. Good morning. Thank you so much for the presentation. And I have to comment, those are great pictures. They're great. They're really great pictures. Also, I'm allergic to sagebrush, so I probably wouldn't want to. I know I live in Nevada, right? Go figure. Anyway, I do have a couple of questions, however, and thank you, Chair, for allowing me to get a couple of them in. I'd like to go to Decision Unit E363, specifically regarding the travel. That's as I'm sure you can imagine, that would get our attention. That's quite an increase for in-state and out-of-state travel. My calculations, and I'm no mathematician, but it's about a 43% increase. That seems rather large. So just please discuss the need for the increased travel expenses for this upcoming biennium.
Thank you for the question, Chair Taylor. Alan Janae for the record. And so when you look at this, there's a couple different things that come to play. In the director's office, probably one of the higher turnover rates, especially most of those employees are within 2.5 years of being in their positions, including myself, but most everybody else around me. And then also in physical division that is one of those segments of our agency where a lot in common with all the other agencies. Those are common positions that tend to fluctuate and move around each from agency to agency. And so those are some of the things we're trying to do, is set that up to try to get them the training, get them into situations where they can be better informed, but also have that ability to see more things in their roles with the agency, given their new positions. The other piece to the fact of the 43% increase. So one of the things in this is, in discussions with our budget, is there was some misunderstanding, confusion around AB 346 and how to deal with travel. And so they were basically moved in as an enhancement. Much of this is past travel. It truly wasn't an uptick. And so that confounds this issue. And so there are things that we're trying to do, trying to give people more opportunity, but it is not the stated number of 43%. It's a lower number. I don't have that currently, and I could offer if Deputy Director Jordan Goshert might have any better information as far as a number that she may have worked up.
Thank you. Jordan Goshert for the record, Goshert. I don't have a number exactly, but I would just like to point out that several of these trips are not new, like Director Janae said. There's things like inflation that come in with increased travel costs. And then just speaking back to the construction project coordinators, we think that travel will be reduced for the one position, but there'll still be travel needed within each region to accomplish those tasks too.
Thank you, Director and Deputy Director. I want to go back. If you said some of this is past travel, did not help me understand.
So, thank you for the question, Alan Janae. And so when you look back at this, is that we used basically some of our past travel, the things that we do that we commonly do, and we use that as kind of the indicator of where we're going to be projecting travel into the future. And so that is much of what we used back in when we were creating this, which was probably July of last year, is we're using our best crystal ball to try to project those. And there are things that we do, such as commission meetings, such as we do regional meetings with our employees, try to do quarterly every year. And so you'll see a movement of our staff around the state to try to facilitate those. There are other conferences that we travel to out of state that are typical travel for us because it gets us into our Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies and helps our people develop professionally, but also gets us tied into national conversations relative to the management of conservation on across the West.
Thank you, Director Janae. I just want to kind of focus in a little bit. Help me understand the past travel. I know there's this the Deputy Director Goshort said it's existing things that you always do. Is that what you mean by past travel? Because to me, when I hear past travel, and so therefore it isn't a number, it makes me think, well, that's a trip we already took, but we're going to pay for it. So help me. I'm not sure if that's what you mean. And if that's what you mean, it's okay, but
No.
I just want to understand.
Thank you for the opportunity to clarify again, Alan Janae. So as I mentioned, when I say past, those are those common occurrences. Those are those common issues. It's not taking one-off singular items that we did previously. We were looking at things that we know we've done previously that we're going to continue to do on an annual basis. Those regional meetings, those commission meetings that are pretty much a set schedule. And then the others, we're looking at our crystal ball, looking at the maintenance requirements that we have, and we're going, okay, these are the other things that we need to do. And so when I reference past, those are those common occurrences happen annually.
Understandable. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Director Janae. Just so if by chance, if you don't get a 43% increase, right, and you get something different, how will you prioritize either the conferences or the staff members that will attend? Do you have a strategy for that?
Thank you for the question, Alan Janae. I appreciate it would be a process that we would have to actively go into and create that. Basically, we would look at the value to prioritize, who the positions are and what the value of that travel is. And that would have to be the process. We'd have to actively work with the individuals within the director's sphere of influence to try to control that. I can say that when it comes to in-state, is probably, maintenance is one of our highest items, trying to maintain safe facilities, so we'd probably be looking at engineering, but also having conversations and communicating with our employees is also really important. But probably at the top of the list that we are absolutely obligated to do is the Board of Wildlife Commissioners, and we have little control over facilitating that calendar or that schedule. So, but that would be what we would be looking at.
Okay,
Thank you for
I
the
appreciate
question.
that, and I don't want to make it seem like I'm not anti conferences or training or anything like that. It's what I do for a living, so certainly not anti that. But I don't do it for them. Just on the record, I do not do wildlife travel. Just for the record, just help me understand a little bit though on some of this, especially when things are a little tight. They're like, for an example, some of the background information mentions your recommendation is to send 6 staff members to the Conservation Business Managers Association conference in Boise. Do we need 6?
Thank you for the question. This is Alan Janae. So those are opportunities that we look at, and CBMA, WAFWA, those are very large conferences that deal with technical expertise, and as you can imagine, each of them have various committees that are affiliated with their expertise, their level of expertise, or what they're working on. And so that's the type of situation. Also, when we look at this and we're projecting 6, it's going back to also the age of that individual within that, well, not the age of them, but their duration within that position. And so there are opportunities in these conferences to increase their understanding of processes. I know that at CBMA, that's much more in Jordan Goshard's wheelhouse, but even as a director sitting back, there are very nuanced things about managing money and budgets within wildlife departments, as I mentioned earlier. And so it's very nuanced, and trying to get on top of the newest rules, regulations, guidance. Oftentimes there are federal agencies there that are also providing input and transferring on their knowledge and changes that come through their systems. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you. I get that. It's trying to bring young staff members, not an age, but an experience and whatnot on there. Is there a possibility you could maybe perhaps rotate? Some go this year, some go next year, or something like that? Just trying to stretch the dollar.
Yes. Thank you for the question, Alan, Janae. And there are opportunities. Again, it's as we see turnover and we're trying to get most informed, most educated, there are opportunities, that we can, and if it came to that point, we could shrink back some of those requests and prioritize and then transfer information. But it is very tough, as with my experience, especially in AFWA, WAFWA, is these very large conferences, there's a lot of meetings going on at the same time. And so you can absolutely have the best intent of trying to attend to everything, and you can't. And so you wouldn't get that information. The department would miss that information. But realities of budgets and physical constraints, absolutely the department would have to prioritize.
I appreciate that, Director Janae. It's like I said, I think professional development is really important. Seriously, I do. But just balancing that with the realities of where we are financially. So thank you so much, Chair. Thank you for allowing the questions. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Now I believe we have a question from Senator Nguyen.
I am shifting topics completely, and I appreciate you guys going through your all the budgets. It made me want to get out of this building, actually, all those pictures. I agree with what Senator Taylor said. I'm going to talk to you about some of the database system that you're using to kind of help make better, I guess, data driven results, which I'm always a fan of. But do you have any challenges that you're experiencing currently with the existing decentralized data management process? And how would this new database system improve that management in those systems?
Thank you for the question. For the record, Alan Janae. Great question. As I say, we are scientists. We are great at collecting information. Often, unless there's a process and a system by which those individuals ship that information into a centralized system, it's not always guaranteed that it's always collected, nor that it's always in the same format, nor is it available for use at the drop of a hat by either the agency or to supply to the public. And so, as you can imagine, there are various means in which you can store scientific data, everything from Excel to Access databases to other databases that are more modern than my reference points. So that what we're trying to do is get this system stood up so that annually there is basically a feeding in the system of all of the information from all of the biologists, so that it is in one centralized location that is easily accessible. And should the legislature ask for a piece of information, it could be handled in a very short amount of time, probably in this situation of days, of querying that database and extracting that information. Currently, our system would be, if you were asking for big game quotas, things like that, we're very good at, because those have decision pieces that we provide into the commission, Board of Wildlife Commissioners, for decisions. And so those are really good. When you get into into more obscure species, some of the biodiversity division species, those can definitely be in a situation where they aren't always delivered, nor are they always centralized in what that spreadsheet looks like and how you pull that information together into one centralized space. And so this system, the goal of it is to get this annual call for data, get it put into that certain framework, that it's all standardized, and we could ask or query that system at any point and have a very, very quick response and delivery of that information for whatever the intent is, either the Board of Wildlife Commissioners, the legislature, or and now in our management.
Do you have concerns that there will be additional costs with once, do you have a program selected or?
Thank you
This
for the
point?
question. So we are currently looking at systems. We've had conversations with other states, looking at what they are putting together. We have run a request for information, trying to get examples. We're aware of them based on best available data and those cost estimates. This is what our projection is, and so this is what we think we can get started on this effort.
Do you know what that timeline might be?
We've got it factored in for 2 years. We know that it'll be more than 2 years of, any time you're dealing with that amount of information and that degree of specificity and data collection, it's going to take time. This is much about, we're going to take it in modules, and we're going to create one for each division so that each of those can incorporate and develop their own standards, but yet it's all housed within one centralized system. And so you contemplate that there are 7 divisions. Many of those are resource divisions, which are the ones that really generate the data. I would anticipate it's going to take us a little over 2 years for sure.
And when you say a little over 2 years, that's procuring a vendor, implementation, operational system, a little over 2 years.
Yeah. So
optimistically.
let me clarify that. Once a vendor is selected, it'll probably take us over 2 years.
Okay.
I have my experience in going through that process, and it does take more time. And also in the design, we're trying to contemplate an off-the-shelf system so that it doesn't take the design time that other past experience with other database developments. That timeline can get really long when you contemplate custom. We're trying to find those opportunities for a very much off-the-shelf fit for the agency, that we can take something that's available and then structure it to us and then move forward. So that should help cut down timelines.
I appreciate that. I think we've heard the members of this committee over and over and over again about the well-intentioned conversion to more modern systems and how we can over-customize our programming to fit our very specific niche needs, and then we can't ever upgrade and we can't ever keep up with things when it has to do with security or just basic functioning. So I appreciate that you have that in mind. Do you see any ongoing costs once we're ultimately into this database? Obviously the maintenance, but would that be more efficient now that it's in a more centralized database than as it currently stands? Or do you anticipate there being more ongoing costs associated with maintaining this database as opposed to what we currently have?
Thank you. For the record, Alan Janae, and I absolutely know that there will be a maintenance cost. Not quite sure exactly. It'll be a matter of what system we select and how that process works. We do have our own IT staff, and we do have our own GIS staff, and so that will assist in that data management and maintenance. But I probably anticipate, given my experience with past developments of database systems, is that there are certain things that you learn over time that you have to tweak and adjust for particular reasons, sometimes not even at the control of the agency, software updates, things like that, things change. And so trying to make that commitment towards the maintenance and the long-term functionality of the system so that it does not, as you referenced, aged out and become kind of a stone tablet in modern times.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's very triggering to talk about database systems and computer systems and programming at this point already in session, but I appreciate your answers and your candor in this.
Thank you. And so just to follow up, just to make sure that I'm kind of clear on this from the budget side. So it sounds like it's going to take a while, and you feel confident that with this allocation, it will be enough to, you feel confident that you'll be able to go out, put it out for bid, identify a vendor, and begin working through that process for kind of this initial scope of work that's envisioned here. That's probably going to go into the next biennium and budgeting cycle, and so I guess just to confirm that you feel this is adequate, and then likely in the next biennium, in the next session, after that vendor has been identified and everything, then you'll be able to come and let us know what the maintenance or ongoing costs would be, as well as if you're adding additional kind of modules or need other tweaks, that would be brought forward in the future as another budget enhancement. Is that a kind of fair way to summarize your thoughts on this?
Thank you for the question, Alan, Janae. And so, absolutely, I think, if we are not across the line, we would absolutely give an update. And if at that time we have projected increased needs, we would be back and informing that. We do feel pretty confident in where we're at. We did reach out, gather some information, took not a very liberal approach, but kind of a middle of the road approach, trying to shoot the middle with the numbers that we had received. And so we're pretty confident in what we can do. We've had some initial conversations with some people who work in this space, and it's led to our confidence.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Assemblymember Anderson.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm going to keep on with the technology, but I am going to move over to, I think, the it's 4461, and in particular, E226, if possible. It looks like there's some, the new permit data program for very specialized things. Is there any anticipation, of those credit card processing fees being able to be added to the license, or is there a way to have that portion of the ongoing costs recouped by the department from the applicant through assessing those credit card payments? Because sometimes those things get pretty high. So didn't know if that was part of your contract or not with them.
Thank you for the question, Alan, Janae. And so I was just looking over to Deputy Director Goshert to contemplate this question, and I think this is going to be something we'll probably have to get back to you on and give you that information update.
Completely understand, because I think I'd also rather be out in those pictures. Speaking of which, where is that the last picture from?
Thank
know?
you for the question. That photo is of, I believe that's the Lower Truckee River.
I was thinking.
Yeah, those nice cottonwood stands in fall.
That's what I thought it was, but then I was like, I could be off. So, yay. Okay, thank you for reminding us where we need to go, and soon. And then the other question, is there a timeline? Do you have an anticipated timeline to actually be able to roll out and possibly even procure the new permit program that you're planning on for the technology?
Thank you for the question, Alan, Janae. I believe this is a very small lift. This is something that, within this next biennium would be absolutely achievable. And so these are common systems that, again, we're going to try to find something that's already existing and modify it to fit us. But absolutely, it's a very small lift.
Thank you, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And yeah, I think I would just encourage you to think about it a little bit, maybe talk with some of our staff on the credit card processing fee issue. It's something that, we're seeing more and more across agencies, definitely an ongoing conversation. And so we just want to make sure that we have kind of some shared understanding of at least where we're at now, and also continue that conversation, because I think it's an evolution that we're seeing across state agencies. I actually did have one other question. Do you see this as modifications and integrations with the existing system that we use for game applications, permits, and things like that, or do you see this as being a separate a separate vendor, separate system?
Thank you for the question, Al and Janae. So when we look at this does not fit really well within our current big game application system. That's much more about facilitating that draw system. And so we anticipate that this will be a standalone system that'll deal with these special permits that are anything from dredging permits to upland bird training permits. So.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. All right, let's see. I believe now we will move to the next budget account, and we have a question from Assemblymember Mosca.
Thank you, Chair, and I have a few questions, if that's okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, we'll move on to the Law Enforcement Division, and I want to thank you and all that your staff does. It's new to me, so I'm learning, so I really appreciate it. And you spoke a little bit around this question, so just wanted to get clarification regarding utilizing the sportsman revenue for non-wildlife related law enforcement activities. How would that be considered a diversion of funds, and how might that risk losing federal funding?
Thank you for the question, Al and Janae, and I am going to pass to our Deputy Director, Jordan Goshert, who absolutely knows this inside and out.
Good morning, Jordan Goshert for the record. So the federal revenue that we receive has legislation that the state has to assent to, stating that it won't be diverted and used for any other purpose than the State Wildlife Agency. And so at any point in time that we do that, we risk losing that federal funding. So the funding that we use for law enforcement has to be used for wildlife and boating and fishing. And at any point that they're called out for something other than that, like an accident or an active shooter, we should be asking the agencies that are asking us to assist to reimburse us to make that program whole, which doesn't always happen. So we kind of walk the fine line.
Thank you. Yeah, that makes sense. And that kind of leads to my next question of how frequently is this happening, and how have you had difficulty in responding to these non-wildlife related incidents in the past?
Thank you for the question, Alan, Janae. And so when I think about the frequency, I do have my law enforcement administrator here, and she could probably give us an assessment. But I know the ones that I see roll up, it seems like it's, every couple months where something like this occurs in some situation. A recent example of a murder suspect, individuals out there, one of our wardens is out there, patrolling for fishermen, comes along a vehicle and a suspect that fit the description, and here you are, and now you're into a scenario of, working with local law enforcement to try to apprehend this suspect. And so these aren't high frequency, but when you consider the workforce across the state, those are the high level ones that I see. But I could offer Administrator Christy Knight to give us a better evaluation of the ones that I don't see from the Director's Office.
Chief Game Warden Christy Knight, K-N-I-G-H-T. So we have quite frequently first seeing on motor vehicle accidents, which that is actually outside of wildlife enforcement. And a lot of that is because of the remoteness. So that actually takes away from our funding. And then also on search and rescues on land or water, we do that quite a bit as well. And the water ones aren't always boating based, which we're funded for. A lot of it can be swimmers or people out on tubes that are not boating related. So we do have quite different ones that we do more frequently. The bigger ones are every few months, which like the active shooter, the Davis fire, and things like that. So it depends. The smaller scale things, rather frequently, usually at least once a week.
Thank you. Well, we appreciate that you're out there, very much so. And so have you had a difficulty in funding those then? I heard that maybe people don't reimburse, or how does that work?
Chief Game Warden Christy Knight for the record. We do have a problem funding them. We have already gone through all of our general fund that actually helps offset that so that we don't get into a diversion type situation. And we still have about 3-4 months left in our budget cycle.
Thank you. And just my last question that relates is just how was it determined then that $500,000 per year would be needed to support these activities? And how would the agency track the non-wildlife related activities of the game wardens in order to make sure we're properly allocating from the general fund versus?
Thank you for the question, Alan Janae, for the record. When we came up with this proposal, we were contemplating the demand that we have seen by the wardens, but also contemplating this support towards any additional that isn't used within this sphere of public safety, as is pulling any remaining into this boating safety and enforcement piece that we also handle with our law enforcement division. And so one of the ways in which the department funds vessel enforcement is through our vessel registration and titling program. And so when you look at that program, currently we are moving 50% of the proceeds out of that program to the Department of Education. And so as of recently, those funds, I believe, were in the neighborhood of $700,000 to $800,000, and so we're looking for, a contemplation of not asking to keep those fees or anything like that, but consideration of even in our funding mechanism, which is to fund our vessel enforcement and boating safety, is that some consideration of that in addition to this public safety request.
Chief Game Warden Christy Knight for the record. Also, the way we track it, we actually do have a tracking system. Both for our timesheets, we have a different coding when we actually work in public safety, and also we have for our contacts and all that, we have another system that we use to track our contacts.
Great, thank you so much. Great to hear that, and thank you for keeping Nevadans safe, and thank you, Chair, for the questions.
Thank you. And we do have another question, but I just want to follow up on this last point really quickly. So is the department confident that with $500,000 in general fund per year that you can avoid any diversion issues with sportsman dollars and the ability to leverage that for Pittman-Robertson dollars?
Thank you for the question, Alan Janae. Our projection is that should help, as you heard Chief Knight explain, is that we're nearing the end of the year and we've spent what we have, but we anticipate that this additional funding will help us make that full year obligation towards public safety.
All right. I heard that it helps. I didn't hear that it's guaranteed to keep us away from that, but we'll just keep things moving. Senator Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here today. And I have just a couple quick questions on this budget, though. I heard the assistant director mention that possibly billing other agencies when you folks respond to certain crises. I think it's common practice, when they do bill, the fire, our Nevada Division of Forestry can bill other agencies. You must have MOUs when you enter into these situations. Why are you, again, I appreciate that you're protecting sportsmen's dollars. Over the many sessions I've asked questions regarding sportsmen's dollars and appropriate use. So I appreciate that you recognize this others interventions are not sportsmen's dollars, and the feds may call you out on this. So how do you enter in MOUs? Do you bill these other agencies? Clearly, when you respond to a shooting, you could bill the sheriff's department, whoever's the main, because you get assigned somebody that's the main people on any one incident. Why are you not billing for that?
Thank you for the question, Alan Janae. And so, big items like the Davis fire when we were there, dealing with traffic control and evacuations. Those are great opportunities. Those are easy. The MOU process is pretty standardized, and working through that is a pretty simple system. We're working on establishing MOU with other enforcement agencies throughout the state. Some of those we don't have in place, but also, as you can imagine, in some of these small rural counties, they aren't that well funded either. And so trying to ask somebody who's also scrapping for dollars is a tough situation. And so in those scenarios, you know, it may be that they're not well funded either. But we are pursuing more and more MOUs with various enforcement agencies across the state. But typically in those larger circumstances, you know, they are a big enough deal that it is clearly evident, and the process is established, and we work through it.
Thank you for that. But I would just caution that you're probably not in the position to decide whether or not another agency's in trouble financially. And, you know, you bill, and then if they can't pay, they can't pay. But I think I think it would be better for your agency to make sure you bill where appropriate and do the best you can. Clearly, we know in the force firefighting division that they bill all the time and don't get paid. But at least they're hopefully making the attempt. Hopefully they're better at making the attempt billing, and so at least that's some justification.
All right. We'll leave that at that. And we will move on. I believe we have a question from Assemblymember Brown May.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. I'm going to take us back to boating. Topaz, Pyramid, Tahoe, boating. I do have a question with regard to the boating safety education program and the proposed transfer. Can you talk about some of the advantages of transferring the education program to the Conservation Education Division? How is that working? What are the advantages there?
So, thank you for the question, Alan Janae, for the record. But I am going to, I made him dress up in a suit, and so I'm actually going to call him up and ask him to fill in and help with this question. He is very informed on this. And this is our staff educator, Aaron Meyer.
Aren't you so glad you wore the suit today? Thank you for that.
For the record, Aaron Meyer, M-E-I-E-R. I'm the statewide boating education coordinator for the Nevada Department of Wildlife. And yes, I'm very excited because Director Janae does not let me out in public very often. So this is very exciting. A little bit of history. The program originally lived in conservation education, and they moved it over to law enforcement, I believe with the thought that the boating educator and the game warden captain who serves as the boating law administrator would better coordinate if they were in the same division. But I think over the years, we've realized that those are two very different positions, and every other education program lives under the conservation education umbrella. And I'm technically a public information officer, and every other PIO also lives under the conservation education umbrella. Since we've moved over, we've been able to coordinate with all of the other education programs, and it allows us to include boating safety information in hunter education classes, in angler education classes. We've been able to buy paddle sport equipment for all the regions, and that's how we're now able to start offering kayak fishing classes. And we've got plans to do a whole set of kayaking classes, including wildlife tours. And most of this would not have been possible if it was just myself and the regional educator. But now that we're surrounded by all the educators, and they have a huge base of volunteers as well that we did not have, and now we have access to all of this, which is how we're able to start offering the on-the-water kayaking classes. So it's been huge since we moved back over to Con Ed.
Thank you for that. Can you tell me where are we doing the on-the-water kayaking classes? And then how many folks per year are we educating with regard to boating safety?
Thank you for the question, Aaron Meyer, for the record. Right now, the majority of the classes are in southern Nevada. We have just a a really awesome setup down there with our angler educator and our regional boating education person. So we've done quite a few kayak fishing classes, and we're currently in negotiation with the American Canoe Association to come and train several of our people as certified kayak instructors, which will allow us to then start offering the whole 9 yards when it comes to a kayaking class, where we can do like an 8-hour class on the water and give people the instruction. As far as the number, if you're talking just boating education, we're right around 2,500 to 3,000, which is significantly higher than it used to be because we're really promoting that. As far as we run statewide campaigns, you may have seen me fall in the water on one of our commercials. We run a digital campaign and commercials on up here on TV and down in Southern Nevada on streaming, but we reach hundreds of thousands of people with those. Don't or wear a life jacket, don't drink and boat, and take a boating education class. We're trying to bury people with those 3 key messages, because if people actually did those 3 things, I'd have to find another job.
Thanks for trying to keep us all afloat. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Well done. And let us know when we can sign up for that kayak fishing course. That sounds like a really good time. So members, encouragement to join the Sportsman's Caucus, where we might be able to help facilitate some of these exciting opportunities. Let's see. I have a couple more questions. So, I want to talk about this proposed transfer of the technical guidance program over to biodiversity. So, can you just kind of talk about the issues with that program being where it is, and how moving into biodiversity will enhance the department's capacity to provide this technical guidance on species conservation?
Thank you for the question, Alan Janae. And so when you look at our technical review program, it has been housed within the Habitat Division. Basically, it was one of those small tasks that the department started into back when the formation of the Habitat Division in like 1981. And at that time, it was a rather insignificant portion of our wildlife program. But through the years, you look at the number of projects that have been proposed for federal lands, and so the demand in trying to make sure that proponents are well informed of what wildlife exists and what the possible solutions are, and trying to avoid impacts to wildlife and their associated habitats, that's greatly increased. And so we had a rather small workforce, small component of this technical review and guidance within the Habitat Division, with a few spattering of coordinating biologists spread across the state that often relied on their habitat biologists. They're really good at talking about habitats, but not so much when it comes to the species specific. And so we were often coordinating with all of the other biologists. And so it was kind of creating this compounding effect. And so when we look at moving it over to the Biodiversity Division, is each of those biodiversity biologists deal with a very significant portion of the wildlife species within the state of Nevada. And so it helps in streamlining that comment and the expertise into that process. And so that's kind of what we're looking at. Plus, the division administrator, Jasmine Kleiber of the Biodiversity Division, she used to oversee the technical guidance program within the Habitat Division. And so as she took over as Biodiversity Administrator, there was some contemplation of, keeping that expertise in managing that program, and then also gaining the capacity of moving it to the Biodiversity Division.
Thank you for that, and I think that was a great segue to my follow-up. So you talked about Ms. Kleiber and her transfer over. Do you see any other adjustments to staff roles or structures either in habitat or in biodiversity as a result of this change?
Thank you for the question. I'm going to, Alan Janae, I'm going to take a first stab and give you a little bit of overview on my expectation as far as what I know of the position. Ms. Kleiber's old position, which is the technical review staff specialist, that position is transferring to the biodiversity division. And so that'll take that coordinator of that program and then that grant funding over to the biodiversity division, which brings with it some federal grant funding. But as far as the specifics of the other benefits and the specifics within the division, I'm going to ask for Administrator Kleiber to come up, and I'll provide her the opportunity to provide some input as well, because I asked her to get dressed up and come down as well.
Good morning, Jasmine Kleiber, Kleiber, for the record, Biodiversity Division Administrator at Nevada Department of Wildlife. So I believe that Director Janae did a great job of describing what we're really aiming to do with the transference of the program from one division to another. I would add that part of what we are aiming to do here is, as he's mentioned, increase capacity, but also increase our expertise and the involvement of our experts in this program. Right now, it is a fairly collaborative program across all of our divisions. However, as Director Janae mentioned, it started as a much, much smaller program, and now it is expanded to the degree where we have primarily 3 regional biologists across the state reviewing and providing input to our federal land management agencies on over 600 projects a year. And those 3 biologists are also tasked with implementing habitat restoration projects. They're also tasked with going out and conducting mine surveys for our industrial artificial pond permit with the mines across the state. They are now overflowing with a workload that they simply can't accommodate. Additionally, out of those 897 species that Alan mentioned that we have across Nevada, 695 of them fall within the biodiversity division. And so we have this plethora of expertise and additional staff that can help with that workload on those hundreds of development projects across the state. Relative to the actual structure and the positions, in addition to my expertise and experience with this program for nearly a decade, we have the one wildlife staff specialist who would be overseeing that program and currently is overseeing that program, who would be moving to the biodiversity division. We have 10 additional biologists in the biodiversity division that would be lending their experience, support, and capacity to the program. But we don't anticipate that the workload itself, we don't anticipate it's going to diminish at all. If anything, we think we're going to be seeing more projects. And these project types are things like transmission lines, solar, geothermal facilities, mine expansions. So we expect to see more of that, and we expect by bringing in those staff from the biodiversity division to have a more hands-on involvement will help reach that capacity. But the 2 positions really would be me as the administrator assisting and overseeing, but that one staff specialist.
Thank you very much. Senator Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my questions are on budget. They're relatively small, but still, I think, important on E361 and E362, the last 2 budgets that we have. In there, you're listing things like a replacement equipment, trailers for transporting guzzlers, and that brought me to the question that I don't see in any of your budgets. How much when we do the guzzler projects, which are critically important to the state of Nevada, a lot of that is assisted with the volunteers. I remember MBU banquets coming up, and I'm just wondering what portion of that and in your budget would you say is actually donated or grants? And I don't see that from outside agencies like MBU.
Thank you for the question. I'm trying to sort through and find the specific
It's your very last budget.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's
Yep.
E361. It was where you mentioned the trailer for the guzzlers, and I was just wondering what that budget looks like for your whole guzzlers and how much outside money are you getting, and which.
Thank you for the question, Alan Janae, for the record. So, the water development program is probably the poster child in the Department of Wildlife as far as volunteer efforts and contributions carrying that program. I think, and Administrator Matt Maples behind me used to oversee this water development program as a staff specialist, and probably has better numbers, but my referring back to the history of it, my numbers may be a little less than what it is currently. But our grant, I think, was $1.2 million, and the 25% that got us the 75% of federal funds was all generated by volunteer time. And at certain circumstances, depending on the year, sometimes they would contribute materials. But basically, it's the time and the mileage that those individuals put towards that program in these construction projects of guzzlers across the state that creates the 25% match, or the $1 that gets us those other $3 of federal funding. And so we take pride in the fact that this program relies on basically zero state dollars, that it's either volunteer getting us this $1 and the federal grant providing the other $3. But I will absolutely defer to more recent information from DATS Administrator Matt Maples.
Yes, thank you for the question. Matt Maples, MAPLES for the record. And Director Janae was very accurate in his information there. As Director Janae said, volunteers provide considerable contributions to the Guzzler program. No state dollars are used to fund that, and it is on the order of $250,000 to $400,000 per year of in-kind match, primarily through hours and miles.
And then you're able to parlay that up, say 1 to 10, like one of the donations or, volunteer versus, and then generate Fed dollars. What's that percent that you get?
Yes, it's a 1 to 3 match.
1 to 3. All right, thank you. And then just a real quick last question on the last budget, E362, you mentioned in there that, and you had a picture of the water control, and I appreciate when I'm out there looking at those green springs because you have fenced them off, but one thing that's not in that picture is wild horses, and you didn't mention anywhere in your budget impact because they are devastating to these watering holes. And wondering, are you engaged at all from a federal level mitigating wild horse impact, because it's huge on our native species?
Thank you for the question, Alan Janae, for the record. Absolutely, Nevada has over 50% of the nation's wild horse and burro population that exists within our state boundary. And much of the work that we do on these springs is trying to limit that hoof shearing action that we see on these very small water sources that can actually compact the soils to the point of the water no longer flowing at those sources. And so we work with BLM and as livestock permittees and private landowners to basically fence these areas so that that headwater spring that you saw in that picture can restore itself and it doesn't get compacted. It's available at its source for wildlife to go in and out, but in most instances, either there's a piping system or there's natural flow out of that fenced area where water can still be provided to livestock, and in certain scenarios where there are wild horse and burro in the adjacent area, that they also have that. But as far as the department's involvement with wild horse and burro management, it is a BLM program. It is controlled federally by the Wild Horse and Burro Act, 1971. I actually chair the American Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies working group on wild horse and burros. And we continually try to evaluate and contemplate solutions towards the overpopulation of wild horse and burros in the state of Nevada. Currently, we are within the state somewhere between 300% and 400% over designated population levels on federal lands. And given the sheer size and the amount of resources that wild horse and burros consume, it does have impact on associated wildlife populations. And so we try to work with the federal land management agencies as best as possible to try to create situations where we can get to population or try to come up with ways to minimize those impacts. But it is a very convoluted system, and I'll take a brief moment. This is the federal funding associated with the BLM's Wild Horse and Burro program is insufficient. The population that they have in long-term holding is almost the same as the population that exists on the range. And so when you contemplate the feeding of those mouths in an off-range population, it consumes 75 to 80% of the BLM's budget in solving the wild horse and burro management. And so this creates this situation where it's mostly going to feeding those off-range populations and not much availability towards managing those populations, either with fertility control or gathers.
All right, well, thank you for protecting the springs out there, and I'll follow up with you offline on some more details, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for the questions.
Thank you. It is definitely an important issue, and one where it seems like the federal government could focus on some efficiency compared to some of the other initiatives that have been being brought forward. So with that, members, any other questions for the department? All right, seeing none, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
That concludes our budget hearings for today. Our last item on our agenda is public comment. Again, if you would like to provide public comment by phone, please call 888-475-4499. When prompted, provide the meeting ID 822-2206-1131 and then press pound. With that, we'll move to public comment in person. Doesn't look like we have anyone in Las Vegas, so we'll begin here in Carson City.
Thank you, Chair Watts and members of the committee. My name is Jane Amon, Jainamoan, and I'm the Nevada External Affairs Director for the Nature Conservancy. The Nature Conservancy appreciates the work that the Nevada Department of Wildlife does to support wildlife, conservation, and recreation in our state. Their work in support of our wildlife adds to the strength of our state and our economy. Their staff are a source of great expertise and guidance for the public. Our staff at TNC are among those who value this expertise and guidance. For example, the manager of our Atwood Preserve near Beatty works with NDOW to monitor and restore habitat for the Oasis Valley toad. We also appreciate the participation and engagement of the Habitat Division in the Smart from the Start Consortium, which brings together local, state, and federal agencies to share energy development proposals and identify pathways that have the least impact to nature and communities. And the expertise of NDOW scientists and managers provide critical data and information for TNC's restoration efforts in the sagebrush ecosystems of our state. NDOW is critical for conservation management in our state, and we hope that you will fully support their budget request. Thank you so much for hearing our comment, and thank you to you all for your service on this committee.
Kevin Burles, Kevin-Burls, for the record, representing the Xerxes Society for Invertebrate Conservation. Thank you all assembly members on the committee for the time. I just want to quickly voice our support for the Department of Wildlife, especially the work that it does in its habitat restoration and rehabilitation programs, including restoring sagebrush habitat, efforts that support carbon sequestration and spring protection. All of these efforts support various forms of wildlife, including invertebrate wildlife. And these invertebrate wildlife, in turn, by being supported by these actions, support healthy and productive landscapes, including livestock forage and wildlife viewing and recreation, which have all been talked about today. So we just want to voice our support for the department and hope you will continue to fund its efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burrows. We'll see if we can get that number of species increased a little bit. That's under the purview of the department. Seeing nobody else providing public comment in person, AVH, does anyone wish to provide public comment via phone?
Chair, the public line is open and working, but there are no callers at this time.
All right, that concludes our business for the day. Thank you, members. We're adjourned.